Do you have anything further to add before I rule?
By the time Amara Mensah stood up to speak, most people in the courtroom believed they already knew exactly who he was. Some recognized him from newspaper headlines. Others had watched television segments discussing his case. A few had spent weeks arguing about him online despite never having exchanged a single word with him. Somewhere along the way, the young immigrant sitting quietly at the defense table had become a story instead of a person. The judge looked down at the documents spread across his desk before lifting his eyes toward Amara.
Do you have anything further to add before I rule?
Mr. Mensah, before I make my decision, do you wish to say anything? Amara slowly rose from his chair. Across the courtroom, people expected excuses. Some expected anger. Others expected silence. What they got instead would force everyone in that room to confront a far more uncomfortable question. How much can you really know about someone you've never taken the time to see? Before we continue, make sure you stay until the end, because every story has a moment where everything changes. If you enjoy powerful stories filled with unexpected twists, emotional lessons, and hidden truths, subscribe and join us for more. Now, let's go back to the beginning and uncover what really happened. 3 years earlier, Amara Mensah arrived in the country carrying a single suitcase and a promise he had made to his mother. The suitcase contained clothes, family photographs, and a few books he refused to leave behind. The promise carried much more weight. He had promised that the sacrifices his family made would mean something. Back home in Ghana, opportunities had never come easily. His mother worked long hours. His father had passed away years earlier. Every achievement required persistence. Every step forward demanded patience. When Amara received the chance to relocate, his family celebrated with a mixture of excitement and worry. They knew the opportunity could change his life. They also knew that starting over in a foreign country would come with challenges nobody could predict. The city greeted him with noise, movement, and endless unfamiliar faces. At first, everything felt overwhelming. The transportation system, the weather, the accents. Even simple errands sometimes became frustrating lessons in adaptation. But Amara never expected life to be easy. He expected it to be worth the effort. His first apartment was a small basement unit beneath an aging brick building. During winter, cold air slipped through the windows. During summer, the rooms felt impossibly warm. Still, whenever family members called from home and asked how things were going, he always answered the same way. Better than yesterday. It became his personal philosophy. Better than yesterday. One small improvement at a time. During the day, Amara worked at a distribution warehouse on the edge of the city. The work was physically demanding. Long hours were common. Some shifts stretched late into the evening. After work, he attended classes at a community college. While many people were relaxing at home, Amara was studying. While others slept, he reviewed assignments. His goal was simple. He wanted to become a social worker. He wanted to help young people navigate the kinds of obstacles he had experienced himself. That dream eventually led him to a neighborhood youth center. Every Saturday afternoon, Amara volunteered there. Some students needed help with homework. Others simply needed someone willing to listen. Many came from immigrant families struggling to adapt to a new country. Amara understood that feeling better than most. He remembered what it felt like to enter a room and wonder whether anyone noticed you. To speak and feel unheard. To work hard while remaining invisible. That was why the volunteer work mattered. One afternoon, a teenager asked him why he spent so much time helping strangers. Amara smiled before answering. Because somebody helped me when I needed it. The response sounded simple. But it revealed everything about the kind of man he was. Not perfect. Not extraordinary. Just someone trying to leave people better than he found them. Looking back, that's what makes what happened next so difficult to understand. Because nothing about Amara's life suggested he was headed toward a courtroom. Nothing suggested he would become the subject of public suspicion. Nothing suggested his name would soon appear across local news broadcasts. Yet sometimes life changes direction without warning. And sometimes the moment that changes everything begins as an ordinary day. The following Thursday started like every other workday. Amara arrived at the warehouse shortly before 7 in the morning. Employees moved through the loading bays. Forklifts carried shipments between trailers. The familiar rhythm of the workplace felt unchanged. At least at first. Then he noticed something strange. People were looking at him differently. Co-workers who normally greeted him seemed distracted. Conversation stopped when he approached. One employee quickly turned off a phone screen as Amara walked past. A feeling of unease settled into his stomach. Inside the break room, he discovered why. A television mounted on the wall was broadcasting a local news report. The story focused on a security breach that had occurred the previous night at a nearby commercial facility. Several pieces of expensive equipment had been stolen. Investigators believed the theft had been carefully planned. The anchor explained that police were searching for a potential suspect observed near the area before the incident occurred. Then the witness description appeared on the screen. Tall. Male. Black. Mid-20s. Dark clothing. That was all. No name. No photograph. No identifying features. Just a handful of broad characteristics that could describe countless people. Yet as the description appeared, several coworkers slowly turned their attention toward Amara. Nobody accused him. Nobody said a word. But suspicion doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives through silence. By lunchtime, rumors had already begun circulating. People whispered, speculated, filled gaps in the story with assumptions. What struck Amara most was how quickly uncertainty became confidence. Nobody knew what happened. Yet many seemed comfortable deciding who was responsible. That afternoon, 2 police officers arrived at the warehouse and requested a private conversation. Amara cooperated immediately. Inside a small office, he answered every question they asked. Where had he been? Who had he spoken with? What time had he returned home? He provided details freely. He believed honesty would clear up the misunderstanding. The officers remained professional throughout the interview. Still, something felt off. The conversation didn't feel like an attempt to discover the truth. It felt like an effort to confirm a theory. Over the following days, public interest in the case exploded. News outlets continued covering the investigation. Online discussions multiplied. People who had never met Amara suddenly had opinions about his character, his intentions, his future. Watching it unfold felt surreal. The person they discussed online barely resembled him. Yet that version of him was rapidly becoming more believable to the public than the real one. And before long, the investigation moved beyond speculation. Formal legal proceedings began. The matter was heading to court. For the first time, Amara realized something deeply unsettling. The truth and public opinion were not always the same thing. The courthouse looked ordinary from a distance. A stone building. Wide steps. Tall windows. People moving in and out carrying folders, coffee cups, and briefcases. But for Amara, walking through those doors felt like entering a different world. A world where strangers discussed his future. A world where assumptions carried weight. A world where one misunderstanding could change everything. As the hearings continued, public interest only grew stronger. Local news stations began covering the case almost daily. Comment sections filled with opinions. Some people defended him. Many didn't. What bothered Amara wasn't criticism. It was certainty. People spoke as if they already knew the truth. As if the case had already been decided. As if there was nothing left to learn. His mother called every evening. No matter how difficult things became, she always asked the same question. "How is your heart today?" Not how is the case. Not what happened in court. How is your heart? At first, Amara would tell her everything. The questions from reporters. The rumors online. The stress. The uncertainty. Eventually, he stopped. Not because he wanted to hide anything. Because he knew she worried enough already. So instead he would simply say, "I'm okay, Mama." Most days, it wasn't entirely true. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution continued building its argument. A witness claimed someone matching Amara's description had been seen near the facility. Security footage showed a figure walking through a nearby street. Phone records placed him somewhere within the surrounding area. Piece by piece, prosecutors assembled a story. The problem was that stories are not always facts. A collection of assumptions can sound convincing when arranged in the right order. Amara's attorney, Rebecca Lawson, understood that better than anyone. She challenged timelines, questioned witness reliability, highlighted missing details. Again and again, she reminded the court that resemblance was not proof. Presence was not guilt. Suspicion was not evidence. Still, the momentum felt difficult to stop. The longer the case continued, the more people seemed invested in believing it. Rebecca noticed something else that bothered her. A missing witness. Weeks earlier, a report mentioned a store owner located across from the industrial area. The woman had reportedly seen someone leaving the neighborhood shortly after the theft. Yet somehow her statement never became part of the official narrative. The omission made no sense. Rebecca requested records, followed leads, made calls. But the witness remained frustratingly out of reach. Meanwhile, life outside the courthouse became increasingly lonely for Amara. Coworkers kept their distance. Neighbors watched him differently. Even simple trips to the grocery store felt uncomfortable. People recognized his face. Some stared. Others whispered. One evening, while buying food after class, he noticed a teenager looking at him from the end of an aisle. The boy hesitated before speaking. "Aren't you that guy from the news?" Amara nodded. The teenager studied him for a moment, then asked a question that stayed with him for days. "Did you really do it?" Not because the question was cruel. Because it was honest. The boy wasn't asking about evidence. He was asking who to believe. And that was the real battle unfolding around the case. Not facts versus lies. Stories versus truth. As the final hearing approached, tension settled over the courtroom. Arguments were made. Evidence was reviewed. Hours passed. Then, after listening to both sides, the judge leaned forward and looked directly at Amara. His expression revealed nothing. His voice was calm. "Mr. Mensah, before I reach my decision, would you like to say anything on your own behalf?" Most people barely reacted. They assumed the hearing was nearly over. They had no idea that the most important part of the entire case was about to begin. Amara sat still for a moment. Not because he didn't know what to say. Because he was deciding whether it would matter. For weeks, people had spoken about him. Reported on him. Judged him. Analyzed him. Yet very few had actually listened to him. Slowly he stood. The room watched with polite interest. Nothing more. Most expected a short statement. A final attempt to defend himself. Instead, Amara began with something unexpected. My name has been discussed by a lot of people recently. A few reporters glanced up from their notes. Some people know me from headlines. Some know me from social media. Some know me from conversations they've had with friends. He paused. But very few know me as a person. The words weren't dramatic. That was exactly why they worked. There was no performance in his voice. Only honesty. When I moved here 3 years ago, I thought the hardest part would be finding work. A faint smile crossed his face. I was wrong. A few people shifted in their seats. The hardest part was proving I belong. His eyes moved across the courtroom. Not accusing anyone. Simply observing. You can work hard. Follow the rules. Help people. Stay out of trouble. He paused. And still spend years feeling invisible. The room had become noticeably quieter. Amara continued. My father used to tell me something when I was young. His voice softened. He said people often decide who you are before they decide whether they know you. For the first time, emotion appeared on his face. Not anger. Grief. He knew what that felt like. Amara looked down briefly. When I was 12, false rumors destroyed opportunities he spent years building. I watched people walk away from him without asking questions. I watched assumptions become facts in other people's minds. The judge listened carefully. So did everyone else. When he died, I made myself a promise. Amara took a breath. I promised I would never become bitter. He spoke about the youth center. The students he mentored. The immigrant families he worked with. The teenagers struggling to find confidence in a place that often overlooked them. Some of those kids believe nobody sees them. He glanced toward the gallery. I understand that feeling. For several seconds, nobody moved. Not because they were stunned. Because they were listening. For the first time since the trial began, people weren't seeing a defendant. They were seeing a son. A volunteer. A student. A human being. Then a voice suddenly came from the back row. Soft. Nervous. But impossible to ignore. Your Honor! Every head turned. An older woman slowly stood from her seat. I think I need to tell the court something. And in that moment, the direction of the entire case began to change. The woman looked as though she wasn't entirely sure she should be standing. Her hands were clasped tightly together. Her shoulders were tense. For a moment, it seemed like she might sit back down. Instead, she cleared her throat. My name is Helen Carter. Amara's attorney immediately recognized the name. She had spent weeks trying to locate her. Weeks trying to understand why someone mentioned in an early report had seemingly vanished from the investigation. Helen glanced nervously around the courtroom before continuing. I own the convenience store across from the industrial park. The judge nodded. You may proceed. Helen looked toward Amara. Then back toward the bench. I know him. The statement landed differently than anyone expected. Not because it proved innocence. Because it made the case suddenly feel personal. Mr. Mensah comes into my store all the time. Usually after work. A few jurors leaned forward. He helped my grandson last year. The courtroom remained attentive. My grandson was struggling in school. Amara spent weeks helping him prepare college applications. He never asked for money. Never asked for recognition. Helen's voice grew steadier. When I saw his face on television, I couldn't believe what people were saying. She explained how she remembered seeing a man leaving the industrial area on the night of the theft. The person she saw wasn't Amara. She was certain of it. At first, she assumed investigators would contact her. When they didn't, she checked her own security recordings. Then she found something important. A timestamp. A clear image. And a problem. At the exact time prosecutors claimed Amara was involved in the theft, he was standing inside her store purchasing groceries. The footage appeared on courtroom monitors. There was no confusion. No ambiguity. No room for interpretation. There stood Amara, calmly paying for food, exchanging a few words with a cashier, completely unaware that a crime was taking place elsewhere. The timeline collapsed. Months of suspicion suddenly looked fragile. Arguments that once sounded convincing now felt incomplete. The prosecution's theory unraveled piece by piece. Not because of emotion. Not because of sympathy. Because the facts finally spoke louder than assumptions. Judge Harrison reviewed the footage carefully. Then reviewed it again. The courtroom waited. Nobody knew exactly what he would say. But everyone understood one thing. The story they thought they knew was no longer the story in front of them. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the bench. The gesture seemed small. Yet somehow it signaled that the moment mattered. He looked first at the evidence. Then at Amara. Then at the crowded courtroom that had followed every twist of the case. Mr. Mensah, he said, after reviewing the evidence presented today, this court finds no basis to continue these proceedings. A long breath escaped from somewhere in the gallery. The case is dismissed. Those 3 words changed everything. For weeks, Amara had carried the weight of accusations he could not control. Now, just like that, the burden was gone. But the judge wasn't finished. There is another matter that deserves acknowledgement. His voice remained calm. Justice requires more than reaching conclusions. It requires a willingness to question our conclusions when new information emerges. Several people lowered their eyes. Others remained perfectly still. The court failed to give proper consideration to evidence that should have been examined much earlier. The statement hung heavily in the room. Nobody celebrated. Nobody applauded. The moment felt too serious for that. Because everyone understood this case had never been only about one accusation. It had also been about assumptions. About how quickly people can become convinced they understand someone they have never met. As people began filing toward the exits, reporters rushed to update their stories. Attorneys packed documents into briefcases. Conversations quietly resumed. Amara remained seated for a moment longer. Then he stood. Before leaving, he turned toward the courtroom one final time. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Justice is not only about finding who is guilty. The room grew still. It is about making sure everyone is truly seen. Months later, many people would forget the details of the investigation. Some would forget the evidence. Some would forget the headlines. But those words stayed with them. Because sometimes a courtroom changes a verdict. And sometimes a voice changes the people listening. If you had only seen the headlines, what would you have believed about Amara? Do you think people are too quick to judge others before hearing their full story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and the voices that deserve to be heard.